A storm of fire raged across the battlefield, plasma bolts streaking through the air like vengeful comets. The Dominion's war engines, towering constructs of metal and alien ingenuity, advanced with mechanical precision, their cannons churning out volleys of destruction. The sky, once a serene expanse of deep violet, was now marred by the smoke of burning wreckage. The Terran forces were holding the line but just barely. Commander Karun observed the battle from his command platform, his 6 eyes narrowing as he analyzed the tactical display projected before him. The humans had proven resilient, annoyingly so, but that resilience would not save them. The Dominion had conquered dozens of species before, many of whom had claimed to be exceptional. The result had always been the same: subjugation or annihilation. Humanity would be no different. His gaze flicked to strategist Volketh, a veteran of countless campaigns. Volketh stood with arms crossed, his posture rigid. He had served long enough to recognize the rhythms of war, the ebb and flow of battle. Right now the flow favored the Dominion. He should have been confident, but unease gnawed at him. The human defense was stubborn, their formations tighter than expected. He had seen them fight before, quick, aggressive, and tactical, but something about today felt off. A fresh wave of Terran reinforcements arrived, dispersing into defensive positions. Then one figure among them caught his attention. A single human standing apart. No heavy armor. No reinforced plating. Just a simple combat vest over a uniform that looked worn from use but free of the burns and scars that marked every other soldier on this field. Volketh's brow furrowed. Who is that? Karun followed his gaze and let out a guttural chuckle. An arrogant fool. The unarmored human strode forward, his expression unreadable. Around him, his fellow soldiers moved with purpose, securing the trenches, exchanging quick commands, checking ammunition. They spared him only brief glances, not of confusion but of recognition. There was no apprehension in their eyes, no shock or concern at his lack of protection. If anything, there was a quiet understanding, as if this was nothing unusual. The Dominion's forces took notice. Snipers adjusted their scopes. Heavy gunners realigned their sights. The command center's targeting AI locked onto the lone figure, calculating probabilities. It all pointed to one conclusion: an exposed target. Karun turned to one of his gunners. Eliminate him. The order rippled through the command network, reaching the front lines in mere seconds. A Dominion sniper, positioned atop a crumbling outpost, steadied his aim. His 4 clawed fingers tensed on the trigger, mandibles twitching in anticipation. The rifle discharged with a whisper, sending a hyper-accelerated plasma round streaking toward the human's skull. It missed. Not because the human dodged. Not because he flinched, ducked, or showed any sign of awareness. The shot simply veered off course, striking a pile of debris 3 meters to his left. The sniper cursed, recalibrated, and fired again. Another miss. This time, the plasma bolt curved as if repelled by an unseen force, narrowly grazing the air beside the human's head. The sniper's breathing hitched. He checked his weapon's diagnostics. No malfunctions. He adjusted for wind, gravity, even magnetic interference. His third shot should have been perfect. It should have vaporized the human's skull. It didn't. The plasma bolt whizzed past, impacting harmlessly against a ruined transport vehicle. From the command platform, Karun scowled. What is happening? Volketh's eyes remained locked on the human, studying his every movement. The soldier continued walking forward, calm, unbothered. Plasma fire filled the air around him, but none of it touched him. It wasn't luck, it wasn't even skill. It was something else. Impossible, Volketh muttered. Down on the field, Dominion troopers began hesitating. The human was well within range, yet nothing struck him. Their weapons misfired, overheated, or malfunctioned entirely when aimed at him. Some bolts simply missed by inches. Others deflected as if pushed away by an unseen hand. And then the human finally acted. His movements were efficient, almost mechanical in their precision. He raised his rifle, fired a single shot, and dropped an advancing Dominion soldier instantly. He turned, fired again, another clean kill. No wasted effort. No hesitation. Each bullet found its mark, while every shot fired in return failed to find him. Panic spread among the alien ranks. Whispers passed between them in their native tongues. Some began to retreat, refusing to fire at the unarmored human, as if recognizing that to attack him was an act of futility. Karun slammed his fist onto the command console. Focus fire on him. Bring him down. The Dominion forces obeyed. Heavy artillery repositioned, drone swarms reoriented, and automated turrets locked onto the single soldier. A barrage of destruction descended upon him. He walked through it untouched. Volketh exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the console. The Dominion had fought humans before. They were adaptable, stubborn, and creative, but they were still bound by the limits of flesh. This one was not. He was an anomaly, a disruption in the rules of war. The human paused near a cluster of his fellow soldiers, all of whom barely acknowledged what had just occurred. One of them, a man with a scar running down his jawline, glanced at him and smirked. "Same as always, huh, Jack?" Jack Mercer rolled his shoulders as if shaking off an invisible weight. "Yeah." The squad leader gave him a nod before barking orders at the others. The battle was still raging, but they had a foothold now. From the command platform, Karin's rage turned into something else. Something deeper. Fear. Volketh, still watching, murmured a single word. "Interesting." The battlefield was in chaos. Dominion soldiers, once disciplined and unwavering, hesitated at their positions, their weapons clutched tightly in trembling hands. Their combat training told them the human should be dead. Logic demanded it. But he was still standing, untouched, unharmed, unbothered. Jack Mercer moved like a man taking a casual stroll through the streets of a city untouched by war, unburdened by the weight of incoming fire. A veteran marksman, crouched behind a shattered vehicle, had emptied an entire magazine of kinetic rounds at Mercer. Every shot had missed. Not because of faulty aim, he had been trained to shoot in low visibility in high-pressure conditions against targets who knew how to dodge. But the human had not dodged. He had not even reacted. It was as if the bullets had simply refused to reach him. The marksman felt a deep, gnawing unease in his gut. He had fought humans before. They bled like any other species. So why was this one different? A Dominion heavy gunner adjusted the targeting parameters on his rotary plasma cannon, recalibrating for precision. He had watched the earlier failures, seen how the human moved, or rather how he didn't need to move. If aim was the problem, then sheer volume would be the solution. He pulled the trigger, unleashing a flood of blue-white energy, the air vibrating with the hum of continuous firepower. The ground burned where the plasma bolt struck, leaving behind molten craters. Jack Mercer kept walking. The bolts should have cut through him, torn flesh from bone, seared him to nothing, but they didn't. They veered, curving slightly, missing by margins too slim to be chance yet too consistent to be luck. The heavy gunner's mandibles clicked in frustration. His grip tightened on the weapon as he forced himself to stay rational. This was some kind of advanced human technology, a cloaked energy shield, an anti-ballistic field. Something. It had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. From the command station above, Karin watched in growing disbelief. His subordinates were failing him. He snarled, his voice a deep, guttural growl. "You are soldiers of the Dominion, not frightened whelps. Overwhelm him." The order spread through the communication lines like wildfire. Artillery recalibrated. Drones swooped low, targeting lasers painting Mercer's position. Infantry regrouped, their weapons shifting to suppression mode, trying to box him in. A coordinated assault, precise and calculated. No gaps. No errors. Jack Mercer exhaled slowly. He moved, not to avoid the onslaught but to engage. His rifle came up and he fired a single round. A drone exploded midair, fragments scattering into the wind. He turned slightly, fired again, and a Dominion officer crumpled behind cover, the shot clean through the eye socket. He wasn't wasting bullets. Every pull of the trigger ended a life. A squad of Dominion shock troopers attempted a flanking maneuver, their forms flickering with adaptive camouflage. They advanced silently, trusting their invisibility to give them the advantage. Then, without hesitation, Mercer pivoted and fired 3 rounds in quick succession. The first shot struck the lead soldier's throat, dropping him instantly. The second hit another center mass before he could even react. The third sent the last staggering backward, gasping for air before slumping over. The shock troopers had been unseen, unheard, undetectable. He had killed them anyway. From a safe vantage point, strategist Volketh watched the battle unfold, his mind racing through possibilities. He was no frontline warrior, but he understood the nature of conflict better than most. Patterns, probabilities, the flow of combat, these were the things he had studied for decades. And yet, none of this aligned with anything he knew. Mercer was not dodging gunfire. He was not deploying a personal defense system. He was simply there, moving through the carnage as if it refused to touch him. Volketh's mandibles twitched. He is breaking the rules. Beside him, an officer turned, confused. Strategist. Volketh ignored him. He was already pulling data, scanning through combat footage frame by frame, searching for the anomaly. He slowed the visuals, traced the trajectory of every failed shot, calculated the statistical likelihood of every missed attack. It didn't add up. It wasn't human reflexes. It wasn't interference. The laws of probability themselves were bending. On the ground, Mercer reached an abandoned outpost and took cover behind the remains of a shattered wall. Not because he needed protection, he simply needed time to reload. His squad had caught up, taking defensive positions around him, their movements crisp and efficient. To them, the fight was still a fight. They had seen him walk through gunfire before, but they had also seen him bleed. Whatever phenomenon kept him untouched, they knew better than to rely on it. One of them, Corporal Rains, knelt beside him, swapping out his rifle's energy cell. "Command says they're sending in a warmonger mech." Mercer nodded, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. "Expected." Rains gave him a look. "And you're just gonna walk up to it?" Mercer considered the question for a moment. "Maybe." A low rumble shook the battlefield as the Dominion's warmonger mech made its approach. 30 feet of reinforced plating, dual-barrel plasma cannons mounted on its arms, missile pods bristling from its back. It was a walking fortress designed to break sieges and crush resistance. The kind of machine that turned the tide of wars. Karan leaned forward in anticipation. He had deployed these mechs against human forces before, and even their most advanced infantry had struggled. This would be the moment the tide shifted. The moment he crushed the illusion of this untouchable soldier. The mech locked onto Mercer, its targeting AI scanning him in real time. The algorithms made their calculations. Distance optimal. Weapon charge full. Projected outcome, total target obliteration. It fired. The ground shook with the impact as twin plasma cannons unleashed their fury. A direct hit. The dust settled. The battlefield went silent. Even the humans paused, breath held. And then, from the smoke, Mercer stepped forward, unharmed. The Dominion forces stared. The mech's targeting system recalibrated, running diagnostics. No errors. No malfunctions. It had hit its mark. But the target remained. Mercer raised his rifle. One shot. A single bullet, fired with perfect precision. It struck the mech's sensor core, bypassing layers of armor, slipping through an imperceptible gap in its defenses. The machine froze. Sparks danced along its metal frame. And then, slowly it collapsed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Karan's eyes widened in disbelief. "No." Volketh exhaled, whispering a truth he had known for the last few minutes. "Yes." The Dominion line fractured. Some soldiers held their ground out of loyalty, others out of fear. But many saw what had just happened and knew, this battle was already lost. Mercer stood amidst the carnage, expression unreadable. He chambered another round. The Dominion forces had a choice. Most of them chose to run. The Dominion's retreat began as a trickle, hesitant steps backward, nervous glances, weapons still raised but unfired. Then it became a wave. Troopers turned and fled, abandoning fortified positions, ignoring shouted orders from their commanders. Their weapons had failed them. Their war machines had fallen. Their enemy, a lone human without armor, remained untouched. Karan's fury boiled over. His clawed fist slammed against the command station's interface, denting the alloy. "Cowards." His voice snarled across the comms, laced with disbelief and rage. "Regroup. Hold the line." His officers scrambled, desperate to regain control. Tactical overlays flickered with rapidly shifting front lines, marking a battlefield dissolving into chaos. The Dominion had never encountered something like this. An enemy who defied the logic of war itself. But Karan refused to accept defeat. He turned sharply to Volketh, his voice low and seething. "You have studied them. You understand their weaknesses. Tell me, what is this? Trickery? A weapon?" Volketh's gaze remained locked on the human below. Mercer moved with the same deliberate ease, reloading his weapon with mechanical efficiency, surveying the battlefield as if he were an observer rather than a participant. Probability itself refused to turn against him. The strategist's mandibles clicked softly. "I believe," he said carefully, "that we are witnessing something beyond technology. Beyond strategy. This is not an illusion, Commander. This is a fundamental truth of his existence." Karan's upper lip curled. "Explain." Volketh exhaled. "I ran calculations. Every shot fired at him should have hit. Every detonation should have torn him apart. And yet they did not. This is not due to human engineering. This is something else. A force at play that we do not understand." He hesitated, his mind rebelling against the words forming in his throat. The universe itself is refusing to harm him. Karan stared at him, unblinking. Then he bared his fangs. Superstition. You sound like a frightened acolyte muttering about fate. Volketh turned to face him fully. You don't have to believe me. But answer this, Commander. Do you truly think we can kill something the battlefield refuses to touch? Karan's claws flexed. Then, without another word, he stormed toward the weapons locker, slamming his palm against the biometric scanner. A compartment hissed open, revealing his personal warframe, a towering suit of advanced combat armor, reinforced with Dominion alloys, lined with shielding nodes that pulsed with latent energy. If the battlefield refused to kill Mercer, then Karan would do it himself. He stepped into the armor, feeling it seal around him with a satisfying hiss. Weapon systems engaged, power cores hummed to life, and his vision adjusted to the enhanced combat overlay. He activated his comms. Deploy the remaining shock troops. Form a perimeter around the human. No more long-range attacks. No more machines. This ends now. Volketh watched in silence as Karan leapt from the command station, impacting the battlefield below with a thunderous crash. The ground trembled beneath the Dominion's final stand. Soldiers rallied, emboldened by their commander's presence, forcing themselves back into formation. Karan stood at the center, towering over them in his warframe, his plasma blade igniting with a furious blue glow. Mercer stopped walking. For the first time he acknowledged Karan's presence fully. His head tilted slightly, gaze steady. Karan pointed his blade at him. No more tricks. No more impossibilities. Just you and me, human. Mercer exhaled through his nose, rolling his shoulders. He slung his rifle over his back, flexed his fingers. All right. Then Karan charged. He moved like a force of nature, faster than anything that size had a right to be. The warframe servos roared, his blade cutting a brilliant arc through the smoke-filled air, a strike meant to bisect Mercer in a single, undeniable blow. It missed. Not because Mercer dodged. Not because he blocked. It simply missed. Karan felt the air shift around his blade, as though something had pulled it just shy of its target. He snarled and swung again, faster, stronger. A downward cleave meant to shatter the human's bones. It missed. The realization hit like a cold shock to his core. This wasn't human agility. It wasn't training. It wasn't even luck. He was meant to miss. The outcome had been decided before the attack had even begun. Mercer raised a fist and struck once. The impact was precise, controlled, and it sent Karan reeling. His warframe shields flickered. Internal alarms blared, warning of unexpected structural damage. Karan staggered, disbelief surging through his veins. That should have been impossible. No human, no unarmored human, should have been able to crack Dominion plating with a single punch. He forced himself to recover, planting his feet, steadying his stance. He would not be beaten. He would not accept it. Another punch. Karan barely registered it before his HUD flared red, damage indicators flooding his vision. His armor's joints locked. His servos stuttered. He lashed out wildly, but Mercer had already moved, circling him with an ease that should not have been possible. A final strike. The warframe's core sputtered, its power source failing. Karan dropped to one knee, panting, his vision swimming. Mercer stood over him. Unscathed. The battlefield was silent. The Dominion forces, once hopeful, now stood paralyzed, watching their leader kneel before a man who should have been dead 100 times over. The human forces had stopped firing, simply watching. Karan's pride demanded he fight. His instincts screamed for retreat. His body refused to obey either. He looked up into Mercer's eyes and found no gloating, no malice. Just quiet certainty. Mercer exhaled. You can stand down. Karan clenched his jaw, his throat tightening. His fingers twitched against the ruined controls of his warframe. The battle was over. It had never even been a battle to begin with. A single command echoed through the Dominion's comms. Not from Karan but from Volketh. Withdraw. And they did. The Dominion forces broke. The retreat was neither strategic nor controlled. It was desperate, a fracturing of discipline that spread like a virus through the ranks. The once mighty army, with its towering war machines and calculated formations, collapsed under the weight of something they could not understand. Soldiers abandoned weapons, vehicles veered off course, commanders shouted conflicting orders that went unheeded. They were no longer warriors. They were survivors scrambling to escape a force beyond their comprehension. Mercer watched them go, expression unreadable. His hands were steady, his breathing even. Around him, the Terran forces held their positions, weapons trained, but no one fired. There was no need. The Dominion had already lost. Karan lay slumped in the remains of his warframe, the armor cracked, power flickering in and out. His breathing was ragged, his body battered. The weight of defeat pressed against him, heavier than any physical wound. His claws curled against the ground, but they found no purchase. He had fought with everything he had, unleashed the full force of Dominion might, and it had amounted to nothing. Above, the sky still carried the echoes of war, smoke and fire twisting against the stars. Dominion warships hung in the atmosphere, their captains watching, waiting. They could have unleashed orbital bombardment, raised the battlefield, turned this moment into a final, spiteful act of destruction. But they did not. They were waiting for Karan. Mercer stepped toward him. The movement was slow, deliberate. There was no arrogance in his posture, no sign of victory lust. Just inevitability. Karan forced himself to look up, to meet the eyes of the man who had undone him. He had expected cruelty, mockery, perhaps even some smug human remark about his failure. Instead, Mercer's expression was something far worse. Pity. Karan gritted his teeth. End it. His voice was hoarse, raw with exhaustion and fury. You've won. Do what your kind always does. Mercer stared at him for a long moment. Then he exhaled. No. Karan's breath hitched. What? You think I fight to kill? Mercer crouched slightly, just enough to bring their gazes level. You think this war is about revenge? You think I came here to make an example of you? He shook his head, slow and deliberate. That's your thinking, not mine. Karan's fists clenched. He wanted to lash out, to strike, to make the human bleed. But even in his rage, even in his brokenness, he knew it would not matter. Mercer would not be harmed. Mercer could not be harmed. What are you? Karan growled. The words hung in the air between them, thick with accusation. Mercer's answer came without hesitation. A soldier. Karan's mandibles twitched in frustration. It wasn't a real answer. It wasn't enough. But it was all he would get. Behind them, Dominion ships began breaking formation, their engines burning bright as they turned away from the battlefield. The retreat was now an exodus. Volketh stood at a distance, watching the exchange with unreadable eyes. His mind was still processing, still dissecting, still calculating. The battlefield had given him an answer he could not accept. This man, this human, had bent reality, and yet he claimed no divine right, no greater purpose. That was what unsettled Volketh the most. The absence of an explanation. Mercer straightened and turned away, leaving Karan where he sat. There was nothing more to be said. The Dominion would remember this day. Whether they chose to understand it was their burden to bear. As the last of the enemy forces withdrew beyond sensor range, the silence that followed was almost eerie. The Terran soldiers remained still for a long moment, as if expecting some final trick, some last act of desperation. But nothing came. The battle was over. Rains approached Mercer, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes flicking between the retreating enemy and his unscathed comrade. So, what now? Mercer looked out across the battlefield. The smoke, the wreckage, the bodies, there was no glory in any of it. There never had been. Now we rebuild. The return to base was quiet. Soldiers moved with the sluggishness of exhaustion, carrying the weight of both victory and uncertainty. There had been no great celebration, no cheers of triumph. They had won, but no one truly understood how. Inside the command tent, high-ranking officers debated strategy, discussing what the Dominion's next move would be, what the political fallout might look like. Mercer sat apart from it all, rolling the last bullet from his magazine between his fingers, feeling the weight of it. Volketh had not left the battlefield immediately. Instead he had followed them, unarmed, alone. He had requested a meeting. Mercer had agreed. Now the Dominion strategist sat across from him, the tension between them thick with unspoken questions. I do not believe in superstition, Volketh said finally. I do not believe in fate. I do not believe in divine intervention. His eyes narrowed. But I also do not believe in coincidence. Mercer said nothing. Volketh leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter. Probability does not work like this. War does not work like this. And yet here you sit. Alive, untouched. His mandibles flexed in agitation. The universe does not play favorites. But today it did. Mercer turned the bullet between his fingers. Maybe. Volketh exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Do you even know what you are? Mercer met his gaze. Do you? The question hung between them, unanswered. Volketh studied him for a long moment before rising to his feet. The Dominion will return, he said. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow. But we do not forget. Mercer nodded. I know. Volketh hesitated, then added, and when that day comes, I wonder if the universe will still choose to protect you. Mercer considered the thought. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Guess we'll find out. Volketh left without another word. Outside, the war still raged in distant systems, battles still fought on planets untouched by today's miracle. The galaxy had not changed. Not yet. But somewhere in the vastness of space, whispers had already begun. Of a human who could not be harmed. Of a war where the impossible had happened. And of a soldier who walked through fire, unchanged, unbroken, and scathed.